right, good afternoon, everyone. I've got 1:30, and I'd like to call to order the February 6, 2023 workshop of the Lee County Board of County Commissioners. Let's go ahead, since we didn't have a meeting this morning, let's begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Would everyone please rise? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. You may be seated. To begin our meeting this afternoon, I'd like to recognize our Deputy County Manager for some opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Today we're going to talk about the Cape Coral Bridge replacement as well as the Sanibel Causeway repairs. So we have two different presentations that we're going to visit today. So we're going to start off with the Cape Coral Bridge replacement. The board has given us direction over time to look at ways to alleviate congestion on our roadways. One of the first methods we came forward with, if you remember in a workshop, was the Cape Coral Bridge. We had the flyover from Summerlin onto the Cape Coral Bridge. We had some improvements on the roadway, as well as adding a third lane to both spans of the Veterans Bridge and a third lane to the Cape Coral eastbound and replacing the westbound. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to start off with some discussions. We have two options for you to review. Randy's going to go into great detail, but a lot of it has to do with vessel collision, and that's why we're going to see these two different versions and look at which version you choose, whether you want to go with I'm going to let Randy go ahead and start. So, Randy, thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Again, we'll start with the Cape Coral Bridge. The project, you remember, is from Del Prado to McGregor Parkway. It's McGregor Boulevard. The project's about 2.3 miles, and it's over the Caloosahatchee River, which is part of the Intercoastal Waterway System. In 1963, we built the westbound span. In 1980, a large vessel collided with the Sunshine Skyway in Tampa and collapsed a portion of it. And that began FHWA research into vessel collision study. In 1989, we built the eastbound bridge, Cape Coral Bridge. Then in 91, they came out with official guidelines for vessel collision analysis for any bridge projects that are to be federally funded. So the alternative we have, again, as we showed in a prior presentation, on the far side, you can see the westbound bridge being replaced, and the foreground of the picture shows adding a new pier, footer, and the widening of the eastbound bridge. The extended footer down there is the vessel collision analysis that requires strength in your armoring, if you will. So if you look and see, this is the existing eastbound spans, and we'd add this much more footer, then have another pier come up there is what you're looking at in the picture. That'll give you a service life of 35 years on the eastbound span. The 75 years on the westbound span, the national design criteria now is really 100 years, but they haven't changed it. The change is imminent. They're soon going to change that, so for all intents and purposes, it's really 100 years. But to be correct, we're just going to say 75 years since they haven't changed it yet. So again, you'll have a 75 to 100 years on the westbound span in this alternative, 35 years on the eastbound span with vessel collision, which gives you the ability to get federal funding. Again, the pros of doing it this way, it allows you to get federal funding by complying with vessel collision. Some of the cons of this is, if you remember from the previous study, the pier distance between the piers, between this and the next pier, is a lot shorter than the new bridge will be. The new westbound span will have about 170-foot beam lengths, where this one has about 140 foot. So you'll have, I think we saved 17 piers going across the river when we do the westbound widening. So you'll not have, as you're looking at it or a boat approaches, they'll have to jog a little bit to get between the piers, except at the center navigational channel where it's widened anyhow. Again, we'll have to replace the eastbound bridge in 35 years, and the widened footprint has proven in other municipalities to be somewhat of a nuisance as boaters come up and get off and have a picnic on it and recreate on the widened facilities. Alternative 2 is to widen both bridges at this point in time for $20 million more. The previous one was $198.2 million. To widen both bridges at this point in time is $218 million. Again, the pros, it meets the vessel requirement. Then all the piers will line all the way across the river. Again, you'll have a 75 to 100-year lifespan on the whole bridge, not just one side. And the aesthetic opportunities avail themselves if you want to do some kind of a signature bridge with lighting down there. You have all the same kind of piers in there. The other addition to this, it makes it a lot easier on the Fort Myers side, especially with Calusa Yacht and Racket Club, in making their intersection a lot better. In addition, it adds another resiliency measure. When we widen both sides, we can bring the new eastbound side down further away from the river. If you remember, that's where the causeway really took a beating, is where the bridges hit land. So we can extend this bridge a lot further. And again, alternative 1, replacing the westbound span and widening the eastbound span gives you a 35-year lifespan on the eastbound span for $198.2 million. Alternative 2 is to widen both spans at this point in time for $218 million. There's the alternatives. And the question gets, which way would you like to proceed?
We have a question. Alternative 1 and alternative 1 or 2. What did you say? Is alternative 2 more lanes? Is 1 extra lane?
Both bridges are going to be 3 lanes, both directions.
The alternative 1 only gives you 3 than 2 on the current bridge, right? Would it be 3 and 2? It would be 3 and 3 either
3
way?
and 3.
Okay.
Even if we widen. Both alternatives are 3 lanes, both directions.
Commissioner Ruane, yeah, go ahead. And
Could you go back one slide? Thank you.
So we're up about $30 million in cost extending the service life, but we pick up about $10 million in savings on roadway costs.
That's correct.
So,
Roadway costs predominantly on the Fort Myers side.
so in essence, $20 million for another 40 years.
$20 million for almost 65 additional years on the eastbound span.
Right. We pick up 40 years on the eastbound side.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Greenwald.
So the bridges that are there now, if we take alternative 2, do we build them side those bridges and then before we would pull those down? How would that work?
How this would play out, they would build the new the new eastbound bridge south of the existing 2 bridges. They're wide enough, we have enough lanes on those now and emergency lanes and pedestrian facilities to accommodate all 4 lanes of traffic on that new structure. They demolished the 2 existing bridges at that point in time and then built the new westbound span there with 20 feet between them.
Any other? Yeah, Commissioner Pendergrass.
Right now, this is for later too, but as far as the total cost, either alternative is, how would this affect the toll revenue in the future? As far as future bonding capacity, and how would it affect the tolls to the taxpayers, users that use the bridge today?
If you remember,
Randy,
the
hold on.
idea,
Randy.
oh, go ahead.
Pete, will you answer that question?
Commissioner, for the replacement of both the westbound and the eastbound spans, or the additional lane on the eastbound span, we'll have to do a toll rate study in order to determine what tolls need to be in order to pay for that bridge, which we will undertake, kind of in concurrence with the PD&E study. Our plan is to seek federal infrastructure funds. That's why this project is being federalized. So, and that PD&E won't be done until late 2024. So, coinciding with that, we'll do a toll rate study in order to determine, what tolls will support at what cost.
Great, thank you.
And a lot of that has to do with not only the tolls you're receiving concurrently or for your debt, but also what infrastructure funds we may be able to pull down and what we've collected up to that point that can go toward the bridge and pay down that debt.
Thank you.
Commissioner Ruane, yeah?
Pete, we're going to have to do that study whether we took alternative 1 or an alternative 2. Do we not?
Correct.
So the difference really is one's just a little bit more expensive.
Correct.
So either way, the study was going to be done.
Do we have any idea which alternative might position us better for federal funding?
FHWA has a very robust bridge grant program. No grants can be applied for prior to the end of the PD&E. The PD&E should be done at the end of 24. So we can apply for grants at that point in time. This checks a lot of the boxes. It's connects 2 municipalities, Fort Myers City, Cape Coral. It's an evacuation route. It's a congestion reliever. So it's a really good opportunity to get a grant for this.
But, Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
Randy, but both alternatives lead to the infrastructure package, correct? Based
Yes.
on the fact that we're meeting vessel collision.
Yes.
Commissioner Ruane?
And could you expand a little bit more? You used the word resilient before, so if you could expand a little bit more so we have appreciation of what additional things we're going to gain in resiliency.
The resiliency, again, if we did the replacing both bridges, we bring it down considerably further on the Fort Myers side. That takes the bridge end away from the water. They're gonna put sheet pile around and riprap around the base of the bridge near the water, so they'll be very protected there.
And that would be on the option 2, right?
There'll be probably both options.
Both
They can
options.
do that when the widening as well.
So it's not going to be an improvement in alternative 2 and resiliency than it would be from alternative 1.
There'll probably be more resiliency available on alternative 2 because we're replacing both bridges, but there will be some added resiliency in alternative 1.
Given what we went through, isn't that the way we'd like to go?
Pardon me?
Given what we just went through, isn't that the way we'd rather go?
Yes.
Have more resiliency?
Yes.
Okay.
Commissioner Greenwell and then Commissioner Pendergrass.
Yeah, it just seems like to me in the long-term aspects for the county, it just makes so much sense to look at alternative 2 simply for the difference in the cost over the time. I think it almost becomes like a no-brainer decision that seems to be not only for the long-term effects, but for the ability to have something for that long that we don't have to redo again in 35 years just seems to make the most sense to me. So I wanted to at least get that out there.
Yeah, and that's perfect because that's what we're here to do is solicit input so that staff can bring us back future recommendations, not making any final decisions today. Commissioner Pendergrass?
Randy, you were saying alternative 2 gives a better entrance exit for the access for the Toulouse Yacht and Racquet Club, the residents on the north side of the intersection. So how much farther would that bring that away from their current intersection now that we currently see as it is today?
As I remember, I think what we're going to do is have a full intersection to align both that Toulouse Yacht and Racquet Club and the other side there. I forget the name of that side road, but align those with a signalized intersection. There's 2 or 3 different alternatives we're looking at, all of them better their access.
Would that intersection currently exist now with the signal traffic signal? Would that stay as is, or would it be moved further west and they would have other access to come out there? Or would that be like a dead-end road that only goes in our community?
There's a couple different alternatives. If you're driving north on McGregor and you want to make a left going to Cape Coral, you come around that corner and everybody gets in that automatic left turn lane. That's not a preferable situation, so we're trying to take care of that as well. We can either bring those folks out, have them go down, do a U-turn, or bring them down closer to the water and do a U-turn, or have a full intersection right there at their thing. We're considering 3 different options at this point in time.
Well, based upon the cost estimates and the savings we'd see long-term over the next 35, 50 years, like Commissioner Greenwell said, and and enhancements of that community area there between that and the landings across the street, that I definitely would support alternative two.
Okay. Commissioner Ruane?
Yeah, just like my two colleagues, alternative two, I was certainly sold before, but looking at the additional life expectancy we'll get out of it, the more resiliency aspects of it, and honestly, we're going to go bond it. We have the benefit of spreading $20 million over 30 years. I imagine that's what we're going to bond it over, right, Pete? So I think the cost obviously would be easy to offset just in that term itself. So I'm all in favor of number two.
Very good. Commissioner Sandelli?
I would agree with the colleagues. I looked at it a little bit differently. I think we're talking about money, but we're talking about moving people. And I looked at Cape Coral. We're increasing our population by 4.2% per year. Okay, so how do you equate people and that growth with money? And so I took the 198, the lower number, increased it by 4.2%, that growth rate, which don't necessarily correlate, and stuff like this, but you recapture that 20 million basically in 2.5 years. And so it was a matter of drawing people, usage, and numbers together. It's a pretty simple equation. So I'm for number two.
Very good. Commissioners, I don't disagree. I have very similar input to what all of you put in here today. It makes a lot of sense. I think the one request that I would have would be that as you go back and continue this evaluation, that you'd seek every alternative that you could seek for outside funding, whether that's funding from this new bipartisan infrastructure bill that has been passed in Washington, whether it's funding from the state that potentially could come through their efforts to make Florida more resilient and Florida infrastructure more resilient. I know they've got committees meeting at the state level that are talking about that as well. So I think that would be very important to the Cape residents to know that we're seeking as much help, financial assistance from the outside agencies as we can to help them share the cost of this large infrastructure project. But I think, clearly the alternative two gives us more time and ultimately a better bridge scenario. Could you, Randy, real quick, before we close the topic on this one, could you speak to the congestion relief that could be a part of this? As a longtime Cape resident, I know that if you hit that Cape Coral Bridge at 7 in the morning, really between 7 and 9 in the morning, you're not going anywhere. It's going to be gridlocked for a little while. What do you expect this to do to that congestion?
The prior meeting that we had, we discussed Cape Coral congestion coming in there. So the idea, or Cape's desire, everybody's desire, is to have an additional bridge. The permitting at this point in time would be just almost impossible and too lengthy. So the idea to widen both the Cape Bridge and Midpoint Bridge, one lane in each direction, in essence gives you another 4-lane bridge in the city of Cape Coral. So we've taken a look at some improvements on Del Prado and McGregor to make this happen a little better. Again, when we do Midpoint, we'll be doing improvements at the Summerlin intersection to get traffic away from the bridges, hopefully relieve Summerlin and Midpoint corridor when we do the Midpoint, and then we're going to help greatly ease both Del Prado and McGregor intersection doing this project.
Great. Yes, Commissioner Pendergrass.
On that topic, I know Commissioner Hammond brought this up last year. Really one of the big concerns is obviously when you have a DAV on the bridge or an accident, is there going to be more room here for emergency lanes? And also, can you give us a little on this current design as you know it? I know it's not done yet. How much bicycle pedestrian safety measures are in place here? Right
now, it's currently being proposed 3 12-foot lanes, 2 10-foot lanes, breakdown lanes, a barrier, and then a 10-foot multi-use path on each bridge, each direction.
So that would definitely help when you have the breakdowns on the bridges, which now they're shut down. So definitely would help. Thank you.
One last question, if I could ask it, Randy, because I have a feeling that I would get asked this if I was speaking to a group of folks in Cape Coral. What about the scenario where you would leave that bridge that still has 35 years worth of life on it, leave that bridge in place and build 2 brand new spans on either side of it, but you use the one bridge as your pedestrian facility? You leave it there, but you only run walkers and bikers over it, so obviously that would extend the life of that bridge. Was any thought given to that scenario, and what would be the pluses and minuses of looking at that idea?
The minuses on either side would get folks from in the middle back across 3 lanes of oncoming traffic. The reason we're replacing these bridges is they've met their useful life. Each year, I take a look at the bridge maintenance program we have. You know, it's doing 130, 150,000, 180,000 next year, 200,000 next year to maintain these bridges. So even though traffic wouldn't be on, pedestrians would be on, there's still a hefty maintenance bill regarding that.
Excellent. Commissioner Sandelli?
We went through this when I lived up in Tampa, and having that vacated bridge was very popular for pedestrians and for biking. However, as Randy said, spalling and stuff and just age becomes cost ineffective, you know, to do that. And so they tore it down.
Excellent.
So,
Plus, once you had 2 bridges built next to you could never remove that one without removing the existing bridges.
Yeah, I just try to put myself in the folks' shoes, you know, because I think
Sounds like a
each
great
one of
idea.
us, when we go speak, we would get that scenario posed to us. So it's a good one. All right. Any further discussion on this? How about Mr. Deputy County Manager? Do you have the input that you need on that item?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
All right, very good. Before we transition to the Sanibel Causeway repairs, I do want to recognize that we have several folks from the city of Sanibel with us today. Mayor Holly Smith is here. I see City Manager Dana Sousa with us. And did we have another council member with us here as well? Oh, yes. John Hinshaw is with us, so thank you for joining us as well. All right, I'll go ahead, Mr. Deputy County Manager, and ask you to go ahead and take over the Sanibel Causeway repairs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Today, we're going to talk again about the Sanibel Causeway repairs. Following Hurricane Ian, Florida Department of Transportation came in and did the temporary repairs for the bridge, and now they are currently working on the permanent repairs to the bridge. Part of what they're doing is they're hardening the road. Randy's going to get into great detail about what they're recommending. Again, it is a recommendation, but it is ultimately recommendation for resiliency, so that if a storm of this magnitude hits us again, we would hope that the bridge would stay in place. The other thing that I'd like to discuss before we get into the presentation is on February 1st of 2022, this board had a workshop regarding the Causeway Islands and the recreational plan. Following that, on February 15th of 2022, you approved the recreational amenities. So that plan has been given to FDOT, and they have started to build the design around that plan. So that would include the turn lanes, the bike lanes that we originally talked about, the designated parking, the post and rope, the landscaping. All that will be included into this project. If the board agrees. What's positive about this is that once the Causeway Islands open, that parking component will be in place, and we won't have to do that concurrently or following the opening of the bridge. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Randy.
Yeah, Commissioners, the repair that FDOT's undertaking, the permanent repair on the causeway is roughly 1,000, 1,500 feet before you get to the Sanibel Toll Plaza along McGregor. The Punta Rasa area, the A-span, which is the first bridge, A-island, first island, B-span, the second bridge, and B-island into, and then it ends there at Sanibel. Here's some video of the damage incurred. This is the McGregor approaching the Sanibel Toll Plaza. It lifted the one roadway completely up and laid on the other one.
Force of water.
This is the boat ramp area. This is the first island, Island A. to Island B. Again, from the Fort Myers side, Punarass area, Bridge A, Bridge B, Island B, and Bridge C, then Sanibel. This is immediately after the storm. You can see the damage. This were the emergency temporary repairs. Happened within weeks after the storm. These are the proposed repairs. If you can look at the legend, the orange line is sheet pile. These are 3-foot wide sheets of steel, 40 feet long. They interlock as you drive them down. So you end up with a continuous wall of steel. Gabion baskets are just rock baskets about the size of one of these table sections, about that tall, with heavy duty steel wire filled with rocks, and you close the lid on it. So you can have these sheet pile and these rock baskets against it. They have riprap, which are large boulders. The gabion baskets are preferable in some locations. They're more precise to place than just the large boulders of riprap. So you can see all the way around the Punarass thing, they have sheep all the way around there and riprap around the bottom side. The purple area right here are mangroves that we planted, the green infrastructure, if you will, as part of the permitting process FDOT went through as well. This is Island A. Again, the orange line and the red next to it are just 40-foot deep sheep pile all the way around the island. The islands also are raised 2 feet. That raise was due to the sea level rise calculations and conditions that they've determined. Sheep pile and gabion baskets all the way around the island with ripraps, again, at the ends of each island. You can see, if you can see the dotted lines, the green dotted line was pre-storm and the black or the darker dotted line was post-storm. And a lot of the islands, we've had actually gained a little bit more area there. So the improvements that we had planned prior to the storm are still able to be done. In the areas, if you remember the 2 islands that were severed, in those areas, when they put those back together, because the beach line was severed in those areas, we lost the seagrasses. And part of the permitting as well was to replace seagrass there, and they'll put the mangroves there and post those so folks don't go out and swim and walk on reculturing the seagrass. Here's Island B, the same. Again, sheep pile all the way around. Ripraps at the end, gabion baskets, and marine blankets, which are like a grout blanket, about a foot thick, and you fill it with grout, and it's just more precise placing. Here's a picture. The top picture shows the gabion baskets. Again, they're handy. Rather than the riprap that's shown on top, you can place them a little more precisely. The bottom left corner is showing sheet wall sticking above the ground. All the sheet wall that'll be here, though, will be on the ground. And to the right, the box culvert. Let me back up. I'd like to mention one more thing. You can see along McGregor, that orange line there, even along the McGregor where we lost some of that roadway, they're putting sheet pile there as well. That won't be anything sticking up. It'll be sheet pile in that location. Probably have a concrete cap on it, flush to the sand. This shows the estimated costs and the cost of the roadway resiliency that's planned to be put back. The total cost is $285 million. The non-federal share is $46 million. They've also, FDOT again, took our 30% plans that we had post-storm or pre-storm and overlaid those on and gave us a price for that as well. That's the roadway, shell driveway, the designated parking, and the landscaping for an additional $5.5 million, which will make our share, the non-federal share, $51.6 million. Again, the total project to fix is $285 million. So the question is, does the board concur with the resiliency component shown? And does the board agree with including amenities for Causeway A and B at this point in time? I asked FDOT, the resiliency measures, were they to combat this storm or something larger? And they indicated this storm has no predecessor. This kind of exceeded all their design manuals. So what you're getting is something new and bigger than they had contemplated. Any questions?
Costs? Costs? Okay.
Sorry.
So, a couple of questions. Obviously, we had talked about the Causeway Islands. We talked about and received money from the state from a funding grant point of view, as well as money from the TDC. How does that get overlaid in this expense? Or how does that augment, or how does that have any impact on this? First question. You know?
Mr. Chair?
Yep.
He can answer that question.
Sure. Commissioners, we did get the legislative appropriation that we paired with TDT money for the causeway stabilization and amenities that you all had approved. That memory serves, I think that was around $5.4 million of appropriations. I want to say nearly $3 million of that was spent prior to the storm. We think the remainder of it, we'd like to approach FDOT to see if it can be applied to the $5.6 million number that you see as our share of the amenities.
That TDC money, we allocate some, was that the total 5.4? I thought it was higher.
That was just the appropriation.
Okay.
So there are TDT dollars left.
Did we spend the TDC dollars?
No, we did not spend all of those.
So there's a possibility of reallocating those?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So theoretically, this 51 million could be somewhat lower.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And for edification for the board, we did submit this last week to the resiliency committees, both on the Senate and the House side. I'll be up there this week as a result of that. But I'm also told that this is probably a big task. We need to go to Washington for this. But with that in mind, I mean, I certainly am advocating for every aspect that we can to make this as resilient as possible. I don't think that anyone wants to go through what we're going through. And I'm happy to see the different attempts, having had the opportunity to testify up in Tallahassee, listening to some of the things they do on the East Coast. It seems like there's a multitude of measures we're doing here, from tree piles to ripraps to different aspects to obviously help us become more resilient. So to me, it just makes most sense that we do everything and anything concerning the devastation. So I'd be in favor of the entire $51 million. That obviously can be augmented to some degree from TDC dollars and what's ever left over.
One thing I forgot to mention, and didn't mean to interrupt, but the $5.5 million for the amenities, when we gave it to FDOT and they overlaid it on there, they showed the roadways as asphalt. We had no intention of paving those. Probably some kind of good pit shell roadway, so we'll get that figure will be reduced by at least the asphalt amount of the roadways. In addition, the first couple of days after the storm, they dredged from the ocean back onto land to build up the roadway, the areas there, the fill areas, which is a lot better than just sandy soil that was on shore. So it's stable in itself. So what you're going to have out there will be a ground surface that's a lot less prone to getting folks stuck in vehicles as well.
Thank you, Commissioner. I just had a couple questions about the cost, but obviously the storm is devastating our area, what's happened. But I was looking at the big picture here between both bridges, between this bridge to Sanibel and Captiva, how it's going to impact all the Lee County residents. And we currently have agreements now with City of Cape Coral and Sanibel for gas tax share for revenue, for example, toll revenue share. But right now we're looking at both projects together. We're looking at $503 million, $500 million worth of projects. With this one being the total strengthening of the bridge, and then non-funded from the federal side would be $269 million. So that's why I asked earlier on about how it's going to affect the toll rates here in Lee County, how it's going to affect our everyday users in the future for the bridges that are going to be there hopefully for a long time. But obviously I support the project, but it's just going to be interesting to see how it affects the toll for everyday users. We see the cost of living going up and the housing going up, and now this is just another cost, a fee, a tax back to taxpayers. So that's why I'm interested in the future, how it's going to affect the toll revenue shares, and also how it's going to affect the cost back to the taxpayers.
Is there anybody who can speak to that, Mr. Honey? Yeah, because that was going to more simply put what Commissioner Pendergrass just said too, is how do we pay for this?
Well, the impact on the tolls, like I said before, we'll do a toll study, and that's an unknown at this point. I think from a financing perspective of this, basically 20% share that we have for the causeway, we're going to have to rely on help from our state and federal partners for that. And I wouldn't contemplate that being repaid with tolls at this point. We'll have to look for other options.
Pete, on that note, you may not know now, you can forgive me, what's our current bonding we have now for the existing bridges and all the capacity we have now between Cape Coral Midpoint Bridge that goes out to veterans and also for this current Sanibel Causeway? I think it's been in the ground, 12 years now, 10, 12 years now, 12 years, 14 years for the Sanibel Causeway? Yeah, so how much bonding do we have left now, outstanding debt for the existing bridge that we're, if you don't know, we can get it later, but just curious.
Commissioner, for all three bridges, we have at the end of this year about $75 million of balance of principal and interest. That will be reduced significantly over the next 5 years because we're paying debt service of $10 million a year on all the bridges. In 2027, the midpoint portion of that debt goes away, and so the only bridges that will be, so midpoint goes away in 2027. At that time, we'll have $35 million of outstanding principal and interest, and then the remaining bonds are repaid at the end of 2034,
Great.
and that's for Sanibel.
Great, thank you.
So midpoint done in 27, Sanibel 34.
The last question about this, the timing as far as completing the whole bridge based upon the strengthening of the bridge, what would it be? A year?
This project,
Yes.
they were looking a year when it started. It's already been underway for a month. I'm thinking 10, 11 months. Hopefully we see the end of this.
Would it be disruptive of any traffic flows between Sanibel and Captiva and Lee County?
It'll be intermittent. Hopefully they'll do most of the work at night. A lot of the work if they need to close lanes.
Okay, thank you.
So I think we need to separate the two if we can. I recognize that Sanibel's further along the way and certainly would like to believe that we'll advocate for the $51 million. But the timelines for Sanibel is a year. What's the timeline for Cape Coral Bridge?
Yeah, we should have the end of the PD&E in 24.
Okay.
That'll bring us to 60% design. If you remember when we spoke to the board before, at that point we'll make a decision on the delivery method, whether we go traditional design bid build or design build at that point in time. Regardless, we should have the design ending by the end of 26. Construction takes 3 years, so I'm hoping the construction of the Cape Bridge will be complete in 2029.
Follow-up question, Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
So then, Pete, where would the debt on the Cape Coral bridges be in 29?
I'm sorry, Commissioner.
What would the debt on the Cape Coral bridges in 29?
There would be no debt.
Okay. And then in 29, what would be the remaining balance on the Sanibel? I recognize that if we're successful in advocating for the $51 million and/or it's going to be reduced from what I'm hearing, then we're only going to have to go out and bond how much? And I guess the follow-up question is, my recollection is the Sanibel Bridge was at 141 at its peak. What was the peak for the Cape Coral, and it was how many years ago, debt-wise?
I can't answer that. I'll get that information to you, Commissioner. In 2029, the remaining on the Sanibel Causeway will be $26 million.
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate Commissioner Pendergrass's point of view, but I think you need to look at bonding as we have to bond. And there's issues of will we get our $51 million from the federal state and put us in a position that's obviously going to be reduced based on having some money left over from TDC, whatever. So let's say that's not something we have to deal with. We go out and advocate. You're going to have two pieces to this, a Sanibel piece and then obviously the Cape Coral piece. So I appreciate the study you need to do, but you're also doing this when there's going to be no debt left on the Cape Coral Bridge. So I think we're working on a couple different aspects. It's not as clear-cut as both coming on board at the same time. I think what we have going for us is the advantage of that we are paying things off and continue to pay down debt. So we're going to have a lot more capacity in that regard. All I remember from the Sanibel side was $141 million when that was rolled out.
I have a question for Pete. Pete, on that note, since the debt we paid off, as you said earlier, 2029, as far as the debt service is being paid with the bridge, the tolls will not go away based upon that. The tolls will still continue as we're doing now once bridges, because all our tolls are connected as far as the toll revenue, correct?
Correct.
So the toll would not go away in the Cape Coral Bridge.
No,
So,
because-
so my concern was basically 6 years from now or today, when the people across the bridge, if they're paying $2 or $6 or $8 across the bridge, how it affects the people driving across that everyday bridge. They're not really concerned about what happens in 2029. They're more worried about how much it costs to live here now and across that bridge to go home to go to work. So that was my basic, because I know the tolls wouldn't stop even though we got the debts put away. It still stays in place though, for future maintenance as far as burnt store and
Maintenance, and also the tolls don't go away because
right.
you can't build a bridge that lasts forever. You always have to replace it.
Thank you.
Well, several factors that need to be taken into consideration when you're looking at overall cost. It's what's the total cost? What's the time period we're going to finance it over? Okay, and then when you look at what type of coverage rate we had, I remember the Sanibel Causeway was in the 170, as high as 180 at one point in time from a coverage point of view. I'm going to assume the Cape Coral was similar. Okay, so we're 1.7, above 2, our capacity is 120. So when you look at A, we're going to have 30 years. B, we're going to have a lot more debt paid down. C, you have coverage. The Commissioner Pendergrass says no one wants to raise the tolls, but you have coverage of 170, 175, and then over 2. Our coverage needs to be 120. So you have time, 30 years. You have the expense where you're paying down obligations as you go along. And then furthermore, you have coverage. So the bond requirement is only 120 coverage. Is that correct, Pete? 120? 120. So when you have 60 or 70 points on one bridge, you know, almost 100 points on the other bridge, the capacity is mind-boggling. I'd love to have crunch some numbers on that. I think it's obviously would have been a helpful document to have when you start looking at how you add these on. But I do believe based on the different factors, it's not going to have the impact that one might perceive to the taxpayer. That's just my opinion.
I think, you know, the one thing I wanted to confirm that I did hear you correctly then, Pete, that the midpoint would be paid off by 2027, and then we'd be looking at going under construction on the new Cape Bridge right around that same time frame then, if we were hoping to wrap it up by 2029? Okay, and at what point do you typically go out for the bond? Is it right before construction, or is it?
Commissioner, you have to do an investment grade traffic and revenue study in order to bond, and that can't be a year old when you bond. So it has to be within a year of bonding.
Okay, so you would, what I'm saying is we probably wouldn't go out for the new bond on the new Cape Coral Bridge until after 2027, the way things are lining up then, right? Okay.
The debt would be paid off.
Yeah, and that debt would be paid off. So it sounds like we may get lucky, not lucky, but that sounds like things may line up.
The timing is
The
appropriate.
timing may line up. Okay, that's interesting.
Well, Commissioner Hammond, you, like myself, being here, and it's like Mike, a few other people in the room have been here. You remember when the Cape Coral Bridge was 25 cents and the Sanibel Bridge was $3.
Yeah.
So when you add bonding and financing, somebody's making money off the financing, the bonding, and the writing, the construction bridge, the rates will go up. This is, we've seen it happen. Cape Coral from 25 cents to $2 now. Sanibel is $3 to $6 now, and that's what I'm concerned about. Is that $6 going to be $12, $10? We just don't know yet. So that's my concern there, so.
I will say the one thing I would encourage everybody to be honest when you talk to people in Cape Coral about is when they ask you when are the bridge tolls going away, you need to let them know that we're probably always going to be paying for a bridge improvement in Cape Coral. And that's what those bridge tolls pay for. So the answer is the bridge tolls probably won't ever go away. A lot of us who grew up in Cape Coral were told something different growing up there, that, you know, someday the bridge would be paid off and someday the tolls would go away. I just don't believe, based on the amount of infrastructure we have to build and the age and the lifespan of these bridges, that unfortunately we'll see a day where there won't be tolls. And so I've tried to just be really honest with people when they ask me in Cape Coral, do you think they're ever going to go away? I don't, not at the rate we're growing and the amount of infrastructure that we have to build and the fact that the bridges are aging as we're paying them off. I don't think so. So, yeah, Commissioner Sandelli.
I learned that lesson a long time ago growing up in New Jersey. We used to go by we used to throw a quarter in there. I asked my father, this is, 70 years ago, how long do we have to do that? He goes, until they're paid off, then they take them down. Well, I'm going to be 75 this year, and we're still throwing, and it's not quarters now. It's $1 and so on and so forth. So you're exactly correct. I did want to make one comment, though. We look at these numbers, which are mind-boggling a little bit. When you talk about the 5.5, you're talking about roughly another 11%, okay? But when you think about the way we're growing and the use and the loss of use that we've had from the beaches and so on and so forth, that element on those islands, I think, is going to be increasingly important for everybody from a recreational perspective. And so I would be in favor of looking at the whole package.
Maybe a different way to crystallize this is you basically are done with the Sanibel Causeway. You have 20 years because there's only 10 years left on that remaining bond, so you're going to push that out another 20 years. And the Cape Coral Bridge is 30 years. So you have almost a full life of the capacity in bonding. And I think you guys have done a great job of keeping tolls. Having come up from the Northeast, I can remember when the Verrazano was 50 cents. It's $19 today. So you've done a great job of keeping this $6 toll. When I came into Sanibel politics, it was $6. So that's 16 years ago. So I think we're in a great position to do all these things because I think, to your point, Commissioner Hammond, the timeline lines up. We're in a position where we continue to pay down debt. We have time working with us. And when you start to spread things over 20 and 30 years, you'd be surprised, the capacity. Plus, let's not forget the fact that we have so much capacity in these bonds as we are right now. Capacity that, may be reduced, but there's many ways to try to keep the taxpayer having the same types of tolls. When you look at 30 years and 20 years, you look at the capacity we've had on both aspects of it. I do believe that, A, I'm in favor of the 51 million because it's going to be lower, but B, I just think that we have the great timing of having paid down debt the way we have with no Cape Coral debt left and Sanibel, with 10 years left. So I just think it's going to line up in the most financially advantageous way.
Chairman, if I may. I'd like to thank staff for being actually ahead. One of the criticisms that I think I've had and most of our communities always had is we're always behind on our road system. And with this board and this staff that we have now, it seems like we're working on being ahead of it. And I want to thank you for that because I think that's very important as we move forward as a county that we need these things. We're going to need these bridges, and we're thinking ahead. And I want to thank you for that.
All right, Mr. Harder, you need any other input on that one?
No, sir. I think we are good to go.
Very good. Any further business before us then, before we adjourn?
No, we do not.
All right. If there's nothing else, then we'll adjourn. Thank you, folks.